Well, this is another edition of Dateline. We're well up over 750 editions in the last 6 years. Um, I've got a very important topic tonight. Um, it's based on a 1948 movie, incredible movie, about Joseph Davies, who was sent by Franklin Delano Roosevelt as his special ambassador to Moscow. He wanted to find out what the Soviets were all about. He wanted the truth. And this is an incredible movie that I hope we're going to be able to put the link into the description of the show because we would like everybody to watch it. My guest tonight, I really have to stop calling him a guest. He's really kind of a partner and a colleague, Eric Arnow. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Regis. It's always great to be with you. Yeah,
So,
I consider you a real brother.
well, thank you. You posted on your own Substack channel a very interesting post about Joseph Davies and the movie The Mission to Moscow. Tell me why you posted it. You and I have both seen this. I've seen this a couple of times, but tell me why you posted it now, and then we'll talk about its relevance today.
Regis, we are in a war of consciousness. People are deeply propagandized, deeply misinformed about the nature of reality, and especially regarding the war in Ukraine and the nature of U.S. foreign policy and the nature of U.S. policy in general. And there was a recent, I think it was either Lavrov or President Putin, who was talking about indivisible security. And it reminded me of a scene in this movie called Mission to Moscow, in which this movie was made in 1943, and it is about it's about Franklin Delano Roosevelt choosing his college friend, who is now a Wall Street lawyer, who was just going about his business being a Wall Street lawyer. And Franklin Roosevelt got a hold of him and said, I trust you. I need you to go to Moscow, to the Soviet Union, and find out what's going on, because I don't know. And it's very confusing, and I'm getting a lot of anti-Soviet propaganda, and I want to know the truth. And I know that I can trust you to do that. So the movie starts with the introduction by the author of the book, Mission to Moscow. And he talked about how the book was taken up by Warner Brothers, the movie studio, at a time when Hollywood actually had a conscience and was interested in truth, and they made a movie out of it. And the movie dramatizes his visit to the Soviet Union, in which he gets to experience exactly what is going on there, and he speaks he gives his very honest opinion about what is going on there. And one of the main themes that came up was the issue of collective security. The Soviet Union had spoken before World War II about the need for collective security. The Nazis were on the march in Europe, and the United States was watching all this going on. And in the introduction to the movie, this fellow Joseph Davies, they put him on in the introduction, so you're watching the actual author of the book. And what he says, and I include this on my post, he said, I was sent to Moscow to find out what's going on, and I realized that if the Nazis had defeated the Soviet Union, the Japanese would have taken China, and the rest of the world, that is us, we would have been next on the list, because if the Nazis had if the fascists had control of the resources of all of Asia, they would have been able to take over the world, and we could not allow that because we had to protect our own country. So Joseph M. Davies was making the case for the United States to support the Soviet Union during World War II. And there was tremendous opposition to it on two counts. One, that there's a very substantial, what is it called, isolationist aspect of American policy, where you have these people who are saying, we just want to stick to our knitting here and, exploit the working class here, and we don't want to deal with what's going on outside the rest of the world. And there was another whole class, which are fascist sympathizers, as exemplified by Prescott Bush, who was the grandfather of George W. Bush, who participated in a coup against FDR, Roosevelt, in 1934, got away with it. He didn't go to jail. He ended up becoming a senator. That's how it works in the politics in the United States. And there were other people who were I think it was Charles Lindbergh. There were a lot of fascist sympathizers, and fascism was alive and well during the 1930s. And Joseph E. Davies, after coming back to the United States from his stay in Moscow, it was a tough trip. The movie shows that he's kind of exhausted. His wife is saying, you need to take it easy. And he said, no, I have to go out on the lecture circuit and tell people what's actually going on. And that's what the movie is all about. It's a very, very powerful movie because what he does is he points out that one of the main aspects of the beef that you could say that libertarians and civil libertarians in the United States always complain about is how evil the Soviet Union was and how they were cracking down on people for their freedom and so on, and the Moscow trials, the Stalin's purges. Stalin was so terrible because he was purging people. Well, it turns out in the movie they dramatized the Moscow trials, and you have these conspirators who were deliberately sabotaging Soviet industry, and they were collaborating with Trotsky. And Trotsky, his idea was he wanted to get control of the Soviet Union. He had, been in a power struggle with Stalin, and he lost that struggle, and he ended up leaving the Soviet Union. But he was talking to Japan and Germany and saying, if you help me get control of the Soviet Union, we'll give you a bunch of Soviet Union territory as long as I'm able to rule what's left of the Soviet Union. Now, what's interesting about this also, Regis, is the fact that there's a book that was written in 1946 by Albert Kahn and Michael Sayer, I believe, with an introduction by Claude Pepper, the Senator Claude Pepper, who tried desperately to get Henry Wallace elected as the vice president. And if he had made it, Henry Wallace would have become the successor to FDR, and we wouldn't have had a Cold War. There wouldn't have been atom bombs dropped on Japan, and so on. But the point that I'm getting to here is that at this trial, they admitted openly that this was their plan. In the book, this book called The Great Conspiracy Against Russia corroborates what is said in this other book that Joseph E. Davies wrote. So these are very, very important topics. People have been given a decades and decades long of poisonous propaganda to demonize the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union was our greatest friend. And that's what I'm trying to set the record straight here about that. That's why I posted this movie.
It's a fascinating movie, as you've mentioned, and I want to mention a couple of things that I got from the movie. When Joseph Davies, as you mentioned, he is in the opening of this movie. It's him. It's not an actor, and he's explaining that he never thought that the book that he wrote mission to Moscow would have been turned into a movie by Warner Brothers. But this is what he said on why he went. He said there was so much misunderstanding of the Soviet Union. And Eric, here we are, over 80 years later. There is so much misunderstanding about the Russian Federation, not about Joseph Stalin, but about Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation. We're seeing the exact same thing. And what Joseph Davies said, he said, it's our duty to tell the truth as we saw it. And he said, we have to respect the integrity and honesty of the Soviet leaders and their convictions. He said, they respected our convictions and we respected theirs. And Eric, when you look at the situation we have today, we have the same responsibility. This is why you do what you do, a Russophile. You've been here several times. You came here to discover the truth. You've made many friends, and it's the reason I came, to tell the truth about Russia as we saw it with our own eyes. And it's interesting because you mentioned way back then, it was 1938, I guess, collective security. In 2021, in December, right before the special military operation, Vladimir Putin sent an impassioned proposal to the United States, the EU, and NATO, pleading for a collective security agreement in which he said, if any nation's security is not respected, none of us have security. Eric, it's the same play that we're seeing relived again today. Now, I've watched this movie a couple of times and it's very moving. I found myself really to be quite emotional during parts of this movie. And I think, as you have mentioned and as you stated in your post, you hope that movie would help to inspire and open the eyes of Americans and Europeans today. Eric, I want to try to explain for the people who are watching this. You and I were both Americans. We grew up in America. I grew up being a patriotic American at a very young age. How could you not? I lived most of my life being true to my country. My undergraduate degree was in United States history. I didn't learn anything about the real history of the United States until maybe some 20 or 30 years later. And I think it's important for me to say this, that until I was really close to 50-something years old, I was blind to what my country was doing. I was blind to the lies that my country had been telling me about the Soviet Union, and then from the year 2000 on, the Russian Federation. For me, it took a shock. It took being knocked off my horse and my eyes being opened about the truth of what my country was doing and had been doing since the very beginning. Now, Eric, you came to this awakening many more years before I did. But the point that I'm trying to get at is that the majority of the American people are still living under the delusion that the United States is the good guy, that the Soviet Union was evil, and therefore they transferred this to the Russian Federation as being evil, as being the enemy. Now, what we're trying to do with this conversation, Eric, and by sharing this movie again, is to try to open the eyes of as many people as we can so that they can discover the truth as we have. Your thoughts?
You're absolutely right, Regis. I had my, you could say, my major awakening in 1968 at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. I had always opposed the Vietnam War. Even when I was in high school, I just was, when I was in high school, I used to read the New York Times News of the Week in Review every Sunday. We got it at our house, and I would read that from cover to cover. And as I read it, I thought there are some discrepancies here that don't make sense. And why exactly are we going halfway around the world to kill people that don't pose any threat to us? And I'm supposed to put myself in harm's way and possibly hurt other people? I don't think so. Fortunately, my mother felt exactly the same way. We didn't agree on a lot of things, but we sure agreed on that. And then when I was in university, I was, somewhat apolitical, but as the war, really grew, intensified in 1967, 1968, through 1970. In 1970, you may remember, that was when Nixon bombed Cambodia without congressional authorization, a complete violation of the U.S. Constitution and international law, a complete act of war, and 500,000 Cambodians died because of that. And I was completely opposed to all that, and also I was opposed to the whole system. In my senior year, I majored in German literature, Regis, and guess what famous 19th century author was not even on the syllabus? Karl Marx. They don't even want to think about Karl Marx as an alternative understanding of how the world operates. But I have a saying, you don't have to read Karl Marx to know you're getting screwed. So in my senior year, I thought, we're not living in a democracy. We're living in a corporate feudal system where the corporations act like the barons, and they're the ones who tell the government what to do, tell the president what to do. So I understood early on. And it was for that reason that I wanted no part of the economic system. And so I ended up, fortunately, I was able to find a place living in a Zen community where I didn't have to think about earning a living or a career or any of that kind of stuff. I concentrated on working out my own issues and, taking care of my own life and getting myself together, spiritually and psychologically. But then I had, at a certain point, I felt I had to move on and deal with the world as it is, because I felt like being in any kind of institution, you kind of give up your own sovereignty, and I felt it was very important for me to maintain my own sovereignty, my own responsibility for my own spiritual development. So I got involved in the capitalist system. I figured I'm going to have to learn about money. It's dirty, but I'm going to have to deal with it. Maybe I can, in some small way, change it. So I was in the financial service business from 1984 till 2003, and it became quite clear to me that the system is, operating in a very pernicious way. I'll mention that while I was in the Zen Center, I was ordained as a monk at that time, and we used to take this is in the early 1980s. There was a serious crisis developing with Ronald Reagan declaring the Soviet Union as the evil empire, and he was building up a lot of missiles on Russia's borders. The Soviet Union had missiles pointed at Europe, and so there was a big movement to stop that. And so I went down. We used to go down to the San Francisco Financial District, and we had a big banner that said "Vigil for Nuclear Disarmament." And this woman came walking by, and she said, "I own stock in Lockheed," as if planning for a nuclear war that's going to destroy the entire planet is good for a business. It's good for my portfolio. And I'm just thinking, these people are out of their minds. We have to change our financial system. So I thought, I will get involved in that. But I realized by 2000, with the realization that the Bush family itself had connections to the Nazis, business relations with the Nazis during the 1930s. I realized, this is we're heading in a very bad direction when we have, the grandson of the Nazi collaborator, Prescott Bush, as president under highly questionable circumstances, getting a quote unquote elected president in a very suspicious vote count. If you remember that, Regis, the Supreme Court wouldn't even sign off on their decision to allow the election to be stolen. Then we have 9/11 happen shortly after that, and to me that just looked like this is fascism taking hold in the United States, using a pretext of an attack on a major building, just like the Nazis did with the Reichstag in 1933, and this is the direction we're heading. And at a certain point, I thought, this is what am I going to do here? I felt, the U.S. is not redeemable. Now, I want to mention something. I just talked with a young Russian guy. He's 26 or 27 years old, and he doesn't really understand. He's swallowed a lot of Western ideas about the nature of Russia and the Soviet Union. But I explained to him that I'm not anti-American, and I'm not exactly pro-Russian. I'm pro-truth. I'm pro-humanity, and I want the best for everybody. And I explained to him that the problem with the United States is that it's a country of many or most of the people who came here are either economic or political or religious refugees. However, there is a group of people who are opportunists, who are ruthless, and they, after the Revolutionary War, which, by the way, the Russian Empire helped the American colonists during our Revolutionary War against the British, and the average person was fighting and bleeding on the in Valley Forge, while Washington was whining and dining himself. And then the revolution is won, and who gets to write the Constitution? The wealthy, the slave owners, and the merchants and the bankers. So the U.S. Revolution was co-opted from the very beginning. And we have been in a civil war between, if this has been a class war between the super rich and the rest of us ever since that Constitution was created. And that's as Lenin said, imperialism is the final stage of capitalism. So this exploitive financial system that has been operating in the United States from the very beginning, it thrives on, as Vladimir Putin said, human flesh and money. And here we are. So how do we communicate this very deep, painful truth to the American people? Because we will never be able to change this system or change this very destructive direction we're going in until people, you have to diagnose the problem. So, and this movie is a wonderful, what can I say? It counteracts the toxic narrative that we've been fed for decades. So that's the reason why uploaded this movie again. I've seen it several times in the past few years, but I thought because of this issue of collective security coming up, and the fact that people are still, I run into people all the time, Regis, who still really don't get what the Ukraine war is about, or any of these issues. NATO, NATO's they're good people. This guy, he says they're good. What's wrong with NATO? They don't understand the dynamics here. So we need to really we need to educate people about what's actually going on.
I think what Joseph Davies said in the beginning of the film, the movie, is that he had to tell people who he was, where he came from, if they were going to listen to him and believe in him. So he shared his very brief upbringing as a child of immigrant parents, educated in the public schools through the University of Wisconsin. He became a lawyer, and he became one of Woodrow Wilson's boys, and then Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I think the same thing is important here, and that's why I appreciate you sharing your path and your journey to where you are today, and why you're doing what you're doing. People who have watched this show know my journey. I'm not going to repeat it now, but those who don't like us, and those who will condemn what we're doing, will call us assets of the Kremlin. They'll call us Putinistas. They'll call us all kinds of names to discredit us. But my hope is that there are enough people out there of goodwill who are searching for the truth. And my hope is that, just like Joseph Davies, that people today will begin to listen to people like you and me. I want to go back to how people perceive Russia today. I don't believe there's been any nation that has been so misunderstood, so maligned, so demonized, and so condemned as the Russian Federation. You've been here on a number of occasions. I've been living here now for 6 years, but I've been coming here since 2016. I came on the same mission that Joseph Davies did. I came to find out the truth about Russia and the Russian people, about the Russian economy, about the Russian political system. I came here to find out the truth about the enormous role that the Soviet Union has played in creating what is today the Russian Federation, an incredibly strong, powerful, economically sustainable system, and a people who still have maintained, Eric, many of those values from that period of socialism, a caring for one another, a respect for the commons, a respect for hard work, a respect for individual talents and ability. Education was free. You could go as high as you could possibly want for free. Eric, I have discovered, and so have you, the same thing that Davies discovered, is that there was no glass ceiling for women. Women had risen in that period to be engineers, to be doctors, to be scientists in the space program. It's the same thing today. You and I have both discovered this. In all of these areas, there's been no glass ceiling. It's been a society that was based not on meritocracy, and maybe I'm not even using that word properly, but on your own personal merits, not because you inherited it from your parents or from some social class. These are the things that you and I are discovering today that Joseph Davies discovered back 80 plus years ago. And I want to come back to something that you've been saying and repeating, and I'm going to quote this. It was part of your summary to the blog post that you put up yesterday. You said, "I am amazed that the Soviet ambassador talked about the importance of collective security even back then. And yet, when the Russian Federation asked to create such an architecture ever since the end of the USSR and up until December 2021, when the draft treaty that Russia offered to NATO and the USA, both NATO and the United States rejected any negotiations." Eric, I don't know how any person of goodwill who's trying to search for the truth can come to any other conclusion than what you wrote in this last paragraph. The United States has been the aggressor. The United States has been the greatest threat to peace on the planet. The United States has broken every treaty it's ever signed. The United States, as you mentioned, sponsored the coup in 2014. The United States with the UK, with Germany, undermined the peace agreements, Minsk I, Minsk II. It's been the United States that has not been fostering peace. It has been the United States, Eric, that has resisted what the Russians have been begging for all of these years, a security agreement that benefits everybody. The Russians have been saying, if any nation is not secure, nobody is secure. Eric, we're there today. The United States, the EU, and NATO have been denying the basic security concerns of the Russian Federation. That has been the core issue. The NATO advancement with missiles and tens of thousands of troops and military bases surrounding what is now Russia has made Russia very, very insecure. And Eric, because of this, we are on the verge of the unthinkable. Eric, is there a way out of this? Do you think that obviously people didn't listen to the message of Joseph Davies? People are not listening to the message of people like you and me and many others. Eric, is there any hope that people will wake up? And I'm going to finish on this note and throw it to you. 81 years ago, right here in Yalta, the Yalta Conference of 1945 of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, the winners of World War II, met here to carve out the architecture of the future world order. Their goal was to establish a lasting peace. Eric, that dream has totally failed. Those efforts have totally failed. 81 years later, We are so far removed from peace in this world than perhaps the world has ever been. What are your thoughts?
People may not know this, Regis, but following the Yalta conference that took place in February, actually in February, I think it might be, we're very close to the date when, I think we're almost on the anniversary of it. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong.
It
They met
just
for 8
passed.
days in Yalta.
Yeah, from the 4th to the 11th of February. It just passed.
Right. So the when the Nazis were attacking England, England was in a bad way. You know, they were under serious attack, and there was a good possibility that it would have been overrun by the Nazis. Fortunately for England, the Nazis decided to go after their main. England was the appetizer. The main course was the Soviet Union with its vast resources, and they went after the Soviet Union. And at that point, Winston Churchill suddenly became the Soviet Union's friend, and was supplying it and was supporting it and so on. And when the Battle of Stalingrad was won, even Churchill had to admire the Soviet Union. And at one point, he even said that the Soviet Union, quote unquote, tore the guts out of the German army. Well, shortly after the Second World War is won, the Soviet Union has basically done the lion's share of the fighting and dying. Churchill comes up with this plan called Operation Unthinkable, and he wanted to enlist 100,000 Wehrmacht soldiers to reinvade the Soviet Union to, quote unquote, get the job done. And he even campaigned on that platform. And the British people wisely said, get the hell out of here. You've got to be crazy. We've had enough fighting. Well, the point here is that the British aristocracy, as we have seen, is totally depraved and corrupt and psychopathic, and it is, and I would say, implacable. They are the implacable adversary of the Soviet Union, and now the Russian Federation. One of the things that my Russian friend, he was going to invite a British person to lunch today, and I really wanted to ask that British person the following question. So you believe that Russia is a big threat to England, right? They say it all the time. How many times has Russia or the Soviet Union attacked England? Answer: 0. How many times have the English attacked Russia or the Soviet Union or the Russian Federation? Well, in 1853, they attacked in the War of Crimean War. In 1918, following the Russian Revolution, they attacked the Soviet Union, and the United States, whose own revolution was defended by the Russian Federation. The United States attacked Russia after its revolution. You talk about ingratitude. And of course, the British were they had attacked as well. And now the British have been right in there, attacking the Russian Federation using Ukrainian, proxies. But the British are right in there, and they're doing a lot of the targeting and terrorist acts. So can the British ruling class be reformed or be brought around? Not likely at all. The question is, can it be sufficiently discredited? And people are talking about the fact that the royal family has been so discredited that the hope that you're asking for is that the ruling classes in the United States and in England and in Europe have been proven to be so depraved and so corrupt that the people finally say enough and get rid of them. And that may require either a major, electoral change, or it may require something far deeper. Especially if there's a financial meltdown of the financial system, which is entirely possible. We're flirting with it, with Russia and with China and with Iran. If we go to war against Iran and the Strait of Hormuz gets shut down and the whole financial system crashes, then we may see something. We may see some loosening up here of the system, and we can see some kind of systemic change. But it's going to take a systemic change in order for us to get out of the situation. What's the likelihood of that?
Yeah. Our hope has been to try to educate and inform people by presenting historical facts. I've always maintained that history in the historical context is absolutely essential to understanding the current situation we're in. And hopefully, by providing people with a background in the history, Eric, you took it all the way back to before the Russian Revolution. You took it back before the Crimean War. When people understand who the real aggressor has been, the only conclusion they can come to is the same one that Joseph Davies did. It's not the Soviets. It's not the Russians. They're a peaceful people. They have only wanted to coexist as friends in this global environment. And Eric, when you and I look at what's happening geopolitically, President Putin and the Russians, along with the Chinese, have been at the forefront of this new emerging world order that is multipolar, that respects the sovereignty of all nations, that believes that security is only achieved when all countries, large and small, have their security assured. This is, in my opinion, Eric, the hope that is unfolding, that provided the hegemon, the United States, the UK, the EU, those globalist elite who are orchestrating all of this mayhem in their attempt to dominate the world, the hope is that, as I've said it many times before, seeing they've lost this epic battle for control of the future order of the world, they take us down with them in a nuclear Armageddon. You alluded to the emerging, real existential possibility of war in the Middle East. If there is a war, I don't see any alternative but that it will go nuclear. Because for Israel, it will be about survival. It'll be the final desperate act. And then you have to wonder if other countries like India, Pakistan, who knows? Does Saudi Arabia have the bomb? Eric, because of this hatred of the Soviet Union and from Russia, who's being blamed today for almost everything that's happening in the world today, this situation is far worse than anything that Joseph Davies could have ever imagined. Would you agree?
The mentality is the same, but the weapons are not. I have these T-shirts. This one that says "Question Everything." I have another T-shirt, which is a quote by Albert Einstein, and Albert Einstein said, Everything is um, the atomic age has changed everything but our way of thinking, and because of that, we are drifting towards catastrophe. We have to change our way of thinking. The West needs to give up its delusions of superiority and domination and realize that we, as my Zen master teacher Robert Aitken said, we're all in this together and there isn't much time.
Um, that's anonymous message. Uh, we really don't have much time. Eric, I want to thank you for making that post yesterday, for sharing that video, Mission to Moscow, and for joining me today to discuss the importance of that movie, the importance of what people like you and I today are trying to do to tell the truth about Russia and the Russian people that we have discovered through our own eyes and our own experience here, in the hope, that a few will perhaps have their eyes opened. And Eric, who knows, perhaps that a few more will want to immigrate here. Because as you know, current day Russia and the Russian Federation is a very peaceful country, a country without hardly any crime, much less violent crime. It's a country where people respect each other, 185 different ethnic groups peacefully coexisting for thousands of years. It's a country where people respect the commons. It's a country that is peace loving. It's a country where the people here that you and I know and have lived with only want to exist in peace and friendship with the rest of the world. Eric, we're doing what we can.